believe in the ripple effect.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Ricardo Brendas, also known as Ricky Brands, and a great episode for you today. Today I have returning guest, dear friend, and somebody who's been on the show a bunch. He's been on my other show, The Union of the Unwanted, a bunch, which I co-host with Charlie Robinson, Sam Tripoli, and Midnight Mike. And who I'm talking about is the researcher, thinker, philosopher, Ryan Cristián from The Last American Vagabond. And if you're looking to get your news, if you're looking to learn about historical events, current events, and everything in between, check out The Last American Vagabond. He's been probably one of the most censored alternative media researchers and content creators, and I believe one of the only content creators that has been banned off banned.video. But like most content creators that have dealt with censorship, I don't find him controversial. I find him honest, and I find him willing to have uncomfortable conversations, willing to go against the grain, and willing to question everything. And that's exactly what we do on this podcast and this conversation. We questioned everything from historical events to current events to the future of humanity. But before we get into what I hope is a thought-provoking conversation for the listeners, let me remind you this is a Value for Value show. Independent podcasters like myself and researchers like Ryan from The Last American Vagabond need your help and support to stay alive. As Ryan and I both know, censorship doesn't just kick you off a platform, but it makes it impossible for new listeners to find your work. It makes it impossible for the algorithms to suggest your show. Then add to that our willingness to have hard conversations and go wherever the research takes us. It makes it very hard for shows like mine and Ryan from The Last American Vagabond to grow, which will eventually lead to more people supporting our work. So what I'm telling you is, if you like independent media, if you like independent researchers and thinkers and shows like these, please consider supporting us. I have a Patreon page, a Venmo account, a PayPal account. Those are all great ways of sending a one-time donation or supporting us monthly on Patreon. We also have an awesome merch store, which Ryan Graham from the Independent Review Podcast set up for me. And his merch is just amazing. The print looks phenomenal. The material is high quality. Everything's super reasonably priced, and you get it quickly. So if the Ripple Effect Podcast is one of your go-to podcasts, if it's a show that you like and enjoy, represent the show. Go check out all our new designs and get some high-quality, cool merch, and also support a show you love. But I also know many of us are in tough financial times. And if that's the case, please consider helping the show by leaving a comment, a review, a thumbs up, a like, wherever you watch or listen to the Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm sure there's a way to give some positive feedback and hopefully fight against the algorithms that are suppressing shows like these. That's it, guys. Enjoy this amazing conversation with Ryan Cristián from The Last American Vagabond. As always, find all these links and much more in the show description. Also, I'm sorry if you can hear my kids playing upstairs. I have a couple friends over, and I think the microphone's picking up a little bit of their horsing around. So my apologies if you're hearing background noise or weird thumps and bumps. You're not going crazy. That is coming from your headphones, and it is coming from this podcast. Now let's get right into this conversation with Ryan from The Last American Vagabond, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace. It definitely takes a beating on your immune system because you end up being up late, drinking obviously beats up your body. So if you have a lingering little cold or whatnot, that weakening of your immune system gives it enough chance for it to kind of really become an issue.
Yeah.
You know, the drinking, it's, I always say I don't drink a lot. I drink often. I like a glass of wine with dinner. I don't know how to eat without having a glass of wine. It's like it's what complements my food. It's
Hmm.
what I always have with my dinner, and I just couldn't foresee a world where I didn't have a glass of wine with dinner. I remember when I did the carnivore diet, Dr. Sean Baker was going to be on the show, and I'm like, I love these discipline exercises where I'm like, hey, let me give it a try. Let me see if I can eat nothing but meat for
Hmm.
a couple weeks so I can have a first person experience to share with my guest. And the only thing I could not cut out is I had to have a little bit of wine with my meat every night. I'm like, I'll never get through this if I don't have at least a little bit of wine. So I would have like a quarter of a glass, just a little bit, just to kind of complement my meat. And it just, yeah. So I'm definitely way past the binge drinking thing. Like people, oh, let's do a
Hmm.
shot. I'm like, no, I'm good. Like I'm a whiskey or wine guy. I'm like either sipping on whiskey or I'm sipping on wine, or I like brandy and cognacs and stuff like that after dinner. But yeah, I'm over getting hammered and that type of stuff. But there is something nice about loosening people up. I've had great
Yeah.
nights where you're up all night with buddies, smoking cigars or having a drink after dinner, and you're debating things and you're sharing stories, and you always wonder like, okay, would I got as personal into my life journey or stories if I wasn't drinking a little bit and loosened up a little bit, if I didn't have that like that liquid lubrication. So it's a lot of bad comes with alcohol. Obviously domestics and car accidents and whatnot. But I think like everything in life, anything in moderation, and I'm very much a libertarian when it comes down to those things. It's like everybody should kind of have the right to do whatever they want as long as they're not affecting anybody else in a negative way. So
Totally. That's what it all comes down to, right? I mean, it's, you want to, ruin your body with all sorts of chemicals and dangers. And that's whether that's pharmaceuticals and injections or that's drugs and enjoyment. The point is it's your choice. It's your individual choice as a human being. The weird thing is we're in this paternal, it's been this way for a while, but this paternal kind of, paternalism idea from our government where it's like they have to decide what's better because you don't know as much and and it's weirdly kind of encroaching into the social media conversation right now, where it's like, the even like a censorship thing, like, well, that's just the natural reaction to these things, choosing that, and it's like, it's just this weird thing. I've noticed a lot, even during like the last election time frame, where the argument wasn't just that this is what's the idea is that this is what adults do, right? Adults make this decision. They decide to compromise on their integrity when it matters. That's how I looked at it. But it's interesting. I keep seeing that a lot. I mean, it's a good play. I see it as a play. I see it coming from power structures to stop us from choosing what we think we believe in. But either way, it's a good play because it works. It makes you think like, whoa, maybe I don't know enough. Maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe they know better than me. It's like, listen to your betters. That's always the thing. But on the point of drinking alone, I miss it a lot. I really do. I don't drink at all anymore. Not even a sip. And it happened randomly. I just wasn't enjoying it as much. I wasn't feeling as good, and I just kind of stopped. And I just kind of just stopped. But I do miss the social part of it. But it's funny, they say that a glass of wine with your meal or whatever is supposed to be actually really healthy for you. But then again, they say a lot of things. Who knows? But I would agree. I think wine overall, for a lot of reasons, actually has a lot of health benefits. But as we all know, everything in moderation. Like anything over the top can be dangerous for you. You eat enough, benign things, like just take an average thing, like just certain kinds of food. If you eat far too much of it, you can obviously die. It's just like we don't think about it like that when we talk about these other uh drugs and different conversations, like cannabis, for example. It's like still a Schedule 1 drug, even though we all should be aware of how stupid that is. And it's like there are so many things that we use every day that are far more dangerous. It's typical.
yeah, alcohol is one of those things where it you imagine the founding fathers, and when they're like debating these ideas and the Constitution or whatever it may be, like they're probably drinking a lot, and
Probably.
it probably helps a little bit with like kind of not being so fearful of like how people are going to think of your perspectives or opinions, or maybe, hey, I don't want to challenge this person. So I think there is some good that comes out of it, but like you said, everything in moderation, and there should never be any restrictions on it. It's funny because I think we're roughly the same age, but we definitely grew up in the same generation where they demonize marijuana and told you it was a gateway drug, and yet there was like liquor stores around every corner, and now there's just as much cannabis stores around every corner as liquor stores. And you know, the whole time I remember growing up, I'm like, hey, alcohol is my drug of choice, but I don't demonize marijuana because I know alcohol does as much harm to society, if not more, than marijuana. So it's like, you know, how do you justify it? How do you, you know, it was obvious that it wasn't for the sake of protecting people. It was about how do we profit off this? And once they figured out how, you know, that they could profit off it and tax it and whatnot, then absolutely. But I don't know if you saw I actually just had him on my show not too long ago, Dr. Jack Cruz and Callie Means debate on is it a Danny Jones podcast? But they had like a little debate. And Dr. Jack Cruz is an interesting fellow, very smart, really, you know, goes deep into a lot of things. You could talk to him about the Iran-Contras, to Gary Webb, to Danny Castellero, to, I mean, he's obviously done his research. And he's an interesting guy, but he's been talking a lot of trash about Cali Means because he just feels like they're a plant and there's something really suspicious about them. But
is that a Twitter account?
No, Cali Means is Cali Means is somebody who's, I think his sister's a what the hell is his sister's name? His sister's a doctor, and then he was a lobbyist and worked with a bunch of other, I don't know, in the corporate world for a while. But they're very close to, or became very close to Robert Kennedy Jr. and the Trump administration. And
how do you spell it?
So
the name just doesn't ring a bell for some reason. Maybe I don't know who it is. I'm just surprised. I think it sounds like somebody I would know. I'm just surprised.
Well, you know what it is. Sometimes we're so deep in our own research that
totally, yeah, all the time.
Like, oh, I do not know about this, and I'm like, I don't know. I've been researching something else. I think So this is Dr. Jack Cruz, who's been on my podcast, and then that's Callie Means. So that's how you.
Yeah, no, I don't know. It doesn't ring a bell. That's interesting. I'm completely haven't heard any of this. So what? Go ahead. Sorry, go back to it. I was trying to make sure I was in the right mind space for it.
Yeah. So basically, he's Dr. Jack Cruz has been. I mean, even on my show, he was saying it, and every interview afterwards. And Dr. Jack Cruz, he's linked to. As a musician, you'll know who Rick Rubin is. He's good friends with Rick Rubin. He was Jack Dorsey's doctor. He was, he's linked to these, very popular and famous people. And he's been calling out Means, Cali Means, and saying that he's a plant and he's this and that. And there has been people who've been saying that, like Robert Kennedy Jr., who made a career, not a career, but became famous in the alternative media community for his stance on vaccines, has now pivoted a little bit, and people think like, hey, you know what's going on? And Cali Means thinks, or he's been saying that it's because they understand like, hey, these are our goals, but we can't just go in all guns blazing and thinking we can change things. Like it's like baby steps. But one thing that he did say about food and kind of to bring it back to what we're talking about. So Dr. Jack Cruz is like, how come you don't want to ban this or ban that? And he's like, these are all products. And he's like, products should never be banned, right? And you should have the choice to get, buy whatever product you want to use, purchase whatever product you want to use. And, but, just because they're harmful, it means that we should get the information out there. People should have the honest perspective on these products, but they're not for banning things. They're talking about like, some of our cereals and crap food that, the average American eats and whatnot. So it kind of brings it back around to this debate about like, okay, when is it okay to ban something, right? Because it's like,
hey, just so you know, Ricky, I just dropped out. I missed about the last 20 seconds. Sorry about that. I think it's my end. What's been happening lately?
It's all right. Yeah. So I guess it brings it back to that conversation about like, okay, when it comes down to the mRNA vaccine, Dr. Jack Cruz was saying, hey, like we should ban this. Like there's enough evidence we should ban this. And then Cali Means is saying, well, we shouldn't. It's a product. So maybe get the information out there. So it's like there's like a blurry line where sometimes it's like, okay, is it okay to jump to that? But and then is this?
It's an important conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, it is because, right? I mean, this comes down to freedom at its core. Like, so at an absolute perspective, I would side with, I'm mix up the names, whoever's arguing that no product should be banned. Like, so from a very pure, like Like, I agree with that. Like the mindset that here's how this is how this has to be looked at, though. If you're in a position where you're still allowing government to dictate these things, but then simply saying, no, that's where they should draw the line. It's the same thing with like this regulation conversation. Like, I'm all for the idea that government should not be dictating what, regulations for, anything in that context. Like, it's about personal liberty and our individuals making educated decisions that they are responsible for, right? Like, not blaming somebody else. But if you're going to allow, like right now, like we're going to deregulate this aspect, which basically then amounts to the companies dumping whatever they want in water, things like that. But the government still is able to control and is still like, that's not the same thing. Like, it's all or nothing in my mind. You either get rid of a government idea that is able to control, dictate, and regulate all these different things and allow the free market or the free, whatever you would call that real big picture to exist. Or you allow, and I'm not on that. I'm on that side, none of it. Or if you were going to try to make this argument, you would have to, have them be able to regulate things in the sense that would keep us safe and whatever. But then there's obviously the corruption in there. So that's why I'm not on that side. But so it's important to think of it like that. So I would say, in the sense of not allowing to regulate products, I do at a core value agree with that. But then that point comes into play where then the government is essentially still allowing, like, let's say in the case of like an agenda that I hope we're all aware of or able to consider, allowing an injection to roll out that was designed to do something nefarious, right? And then arguing, then, well, we're not gonna step in because, like that kind of dynamic. Even though they're involved, even though they're the ones driving it, then they get to allow themselves, like, so that's where it's interesting, because the point you're making here is about the product and us saying that's dangerous, right? Like, that is something that they know is dangerous and they're surreptitiously using it. And so I see why it's skeptical for someone to go, well, we shouldn't step in there. But maybe he's genuine in his thought, though, that his just ideas, that he's erring on the side of liberty, which I get, but then saying, let's go for the real culprit. So it's a whole, I think we all need to realize that there's no easy answers right now in this conversation, or a lot of these, because it's been designed that way. Like, there's very smart people that have thought about how to make this confounding situation to where we almost call for our own subjugation. And I know we've talked about this, in a lot of different fields of conversation. And so I just find it really interesting, but either way, I think if I had to pick a choice right now, like, make it extreme, which, let's say, like, this was somebody bottling cyanide and selling it as children's drinks or something ridiculous. It's like, I kind of feel like it's obvious to say, well, yes, I think we would argue that as a society, we would say that's not okay. The question is, do we then allow a government to step in, or just allow societal action? That's where I would err. Like, on a side of like an anarchistic society, that's where a society would be like, you can't do this, and whatever the consequence is, get out of our town. We're going to run you out with pitchforks, whatever it looks like. That's not allowed. We'll tell the neighbors, but that's just not what most people can get along with, but that's a this is a conversation that it requires more debate. It's like a lot of these different things. Before I go further on that, though, I wanted to make a note, because you said this, and I just can't let this something people would give me shit for not jumping in, because I'm a passionate cannabis advocate. That I actually very clearly think that cannabis is almost entirely harmless. Now, there's obvious downsides to just about anything. That was my point before. You drink too much water, you can die, right? And I do see that you can have deleterious effects with cannabis if you smoke all day, every day, or inhale any smoke all day, every day, right? There's also the difference of whether you just grind this substance up and drink it because it is a healthy substance that has a lot of medicinal benefits, whether or not you smoke it as a drug. A lot of people can't seem to decouple those two things, But my point is that it's, by and large, a very benign substance. It really is. Even if you're consuming it as a drug, even if it is oils and waxes that are super, super high. You look at the evidence. As Willie Nelson famously said, right? The only way cannabis can kill you is a ton of it falls in your head, right? I stand by that. I really believe that. But there are some things you can point to. But on the side of alcohol, though, and I'm very much still on the side of choice, moderation, but also that there are medical benefits to, regular, like wine, for example. But that when you get into the idea of just using it on a regular daily basis, like you would cannabis, alcohol is exponential, maybe not exponentially the wrong word, but substantially more dangerous. And I think the evidence, like peer-reviewed science over the years, definitely backs that up. Just because I want to make that was clear, because I'd say it's an easy thing to say, if not worse or the same. And I'm like, I think just like we're talking about these bigger conversations about vaccines or Zionism or foreign policy, that we get to a point to where we're able to be like, ISIS is a U.S. proxy army. Okay, let's just all get used to that. Like same thing. Cannabis is not deadly. I think we just need to be clear about that. It's my rant, and I'll let it go. I thought that was important.
Right. I mean, alcohol is basically ethanol. You're basically taking in ethanol, and obviously, there are some. Like I said, it's like a a nice social lubricator, loosens you up a little bit. But
Fun for sure.
yeah, outside of that, I always joke like there's no bad idea when you're drinking, like, but it's just one of those things where like, yeah, everything in moderation. And again, everybody should have the choice to do it. I think the reason I brought up marijuana, because especially with our generations, like they demonize it to such a extent. But I'm like, but yet you have bars around every corner. Every restaurant can sell alcohol. Not every restaurant. There's some restrictions, but you know what I mean. And then there's liquor stores around every corner, right? And there's bars everywhere that people drive to, but yet they can't drive drinking. But yet we all know that
We all do. Yeah.
there must have consumed, at least a huge portion of the people who went to the bar. Most of them have consumed some alcohol, but yet it's illegal to drink and drive. So it's like the whole thing. It's madness. Makes no sense. I was born in a country that decriminalized all drugs in '01, and if for what I understand, that most of it has been a success, and it helped with much of the issues that they were having before.
Well, I also think that cannabis itself is, I mean, it's, and this is where I mentioned, that's why I said about not whether you smoke it or not. Because a lot of people just go, oh, you just want to get high, and like that's just their quick response to it. It's like, well, I mean, in one case, yes, that is that's freedom and choice, right? But at the same time, the reality is that this stuff is, and again, this is very, very, very well documented. Going back to like traditional Chinese medicine, right? The idea that cannabinoids and the health around this are, I mean, it's a miracle plant. I mean, let's be real about it. Like the idea of what this stuff can do. And it's not, to be clear, not about smoking it. Like you take this plant and you can extract these chemicals, or you can, which I don't recommend because that's what the government tried to do with Marinol and it hurt people, but not that I think it's because they bastardized it. But the point is you can take the whole plant, grind it up in a shake if you want. Like that has tremendous medicinal benefits for all sorts of reasons. And that's what I think is really around this, whether it's, and hemp, obviously, the conflation of hemp, which is not psychoactive. We can see that there's clearly a political game around this, and whether that's the Hearst family and their timber industry and their newspaper industry and the threat of hemp pulp and what that to their industry, all these different aspects of it. The reality is clearly that they did not want this to succeed, not because it was dangerous, but because it hurt their interests, or because, in my mind, it showed around the same time frame, let's not forget, like Rockefeller medicine and all these different changes, right? The AMA, and like the reality being that very much threatened their whole petrochemical, oil-based, petroleum-based pill direction, which is what we still exist under, which is killing people. So you have this example of a real medicinal direction, and that opens the door to a lot of other like homeopathic directions, but just cannabinoids. Like, I don't know if your audience is aware that, your body has natural cannabinoid receptors. Like, you don't have receptors to just everything that you can put in your body. And so it's interesting that, so you have your body's designed not to take the smoke from cannabis, but like the cannabinoids, however they get into your body, cannabis being a very clear, one of the most obvious examples of that in the world. Your body thrives with that. And if it's done in a way that it's the full makeup of what cannabis is, like, so all the different chemical aspects of it, not just plucking out one of them, but you take the whole substance, it causes what's called the entourage effect in your body. And this is scientifically documented. And that's not smoking, different. But getting these, again, grinding this up and putting it in your body, you absorb all the different things. Your body literally maximizes the way that it can work. And this is all peer-reviewed science. And the craziest part about it is breast milk and the whole nursing practice. Women's breast milk has natural cannabinoids in it, whether or not you've ever smoked or ever even consumed cannabis, because the whole point is it's about creating the process, what's it called, the lipping process, whatever it is, to get the baby to finally do that, right? And so this is fascinating. I've written about this many, many times over. And the whole point is this is your body's natural way of causing that system to work. And so for 1 second, for us to believe that these things are somehow dangerous enough to be a Schedule I drug that we should be illegalizing around the world obviously does not make sense. Secondarily, what are we being stopped from? I've written articles about genuinely asking, have we literally stifled the growth of the human species by stopping what could have caused, just in a health benefit to an incredible direction of benefits? But then you get into like textiles and hempcrete and all sorts of things that are longer lasting, less deleterious to the environment. I could go on forever, and these things are all very easily proven, so that, again, that's I'm so passionate about that. And for those that know, T-Lab started as a cannabis, basically a law reform website. That's what I started this as way back. It was all around cannabis. It was all around the laws and the lies and the secrets and the conspiracy theory, but all around cannabis. which very quickly broadened out into just, as I'm sure if you take the time to look into everything, foreign policy, the reason it was being done, there's so many different things that it connects to, and that's why TLAV has grown into what it is today. But I'm passionate about it.
Well, Rick Simpson, right? The famous movie. What the hell was his movie about how he cured himself of cancer using oils, and then obviously the Henry Ford. I think his first his first Ford car was the fenders were made out of hemp. The first American flag was made out of hemp.
Constitution. Yeah.
Constitution. Yeah.
Every ship before that, and still to this day, in some cases, was made with hemp was the sails, hemp was the rope, everything, and then on a dime, this stuff suddenly became a problem until you get this absurd clown world version of it. This was like maybe 12 years ago or more. The Navy literally refuses an order of yogurt because it's got hemp seeds in it. It's like, what a comically stupid place to end up in when we know it's not. It's all politics. It used to be and still is one of the most prominent things. It's just weird that became, clearly. I can tell you right now, it was the demonization of it as marijuana with an H at the time, and the Mexican scourge. That's the way they framed it, right? These people from Mexico were bringing in this dangerous drug, and they just conflated that with hemp. And then all of a sudden, people just argued it was all dangerous without realizing they essentially pegged themselves to a less healthy, less productive future by doing that. It's pretty crazy.
And like you said, it's all linked to the Hearst family and the newspapers and all the.
In one way, yeah. A prominent way. That's one of the most obviously documented aspects of it, but there's a lot of other moving parts to it, But I think that's so easily proven that you've got this very, think of it like all the other families. People are less familiar with the Hearst family today, but it is that think about any of the in wildly influential families that are elitist today that are running that's the Hearst family was like one of the main families at the time, and they're still interconnected for sure. And they had interest in the timber industry, as well as the pulp that was used or the paper the newspaper industry, and they connect because you use the wood to make paper and pulp, and then pulp and then paper, and then make the newspaper. And all of a sudden, this guy created a machine that could turn hemp into paper. And what do you know? It was less expensive. It was faster. It was cheaper. It lasted longer. And something that if you were an honest world, they'd be like, fuck yeah, this is perfect. This changes everything. And of course, he says, I see a threat to my industry. And so you manufacture an entire idea about how this was dangerous. And, and the point is that that's how this works. So the billionaires still made their money. And so everything's okay, right? The oligarchy kept going. And that's the same thing we're dealing with today. But we're in a technological version of everything happening today.
I remember buying hemp protein bars. I think On It even sold some, and they would come from Canada. They were legal to buy. I could purchase them. I can eat them, but you couldn't grow them in America, and you couldn't make them in America, but I could get them from Canada. So it's it made no sense. There's examples and examples of regulation making zero sense, which is why you always try to highlight these examples for people, for the normies, because it's here's an example that shows you that the government really doesn't do this for your good, So it's funny because we're supposed to talk before New Year's, I believe. And I'm glad we're talking after New Year's because some stuff went down. And I'm sure you've, it's hard because we're kind of just talking about this with the Cali Means debate with Dr. Jack Cruz. There's so much going on. You can't focus on everything. And you obviously have to pick and choose which things to focus on. And me personally, if something seems insignificant at the time, I don't really look into it until it gets to a point where I'm like, okay, maybe this is more than meets the eye. Maybe this has become a significant story that links to other significant stories. Anything that's going on in the news recently, do you think there's more than meets the eye in regards to the Cybertruck explosion and the New Orleans murder or whatever you want to call them?
Yeah, well, that of all the stories, that one I would say that right now I've looked into. I've been looking into it this morning more, but haven't gone deep as I usually do. And I plan to do that after today, probably today. I'll be talking about later. But it's the same stuff that you're probably seeing. First standout point to me, which is really important. This is something that is constant right now, and I'm not, I want to say focusing on, but I'm making sure that it's a constant point right now because of how I can't help but see how a lot of good intentioned people are falling for what's happening with the government yet again, right? And of course, it's currently the right side of it, but to me, it's just the government. The left, right, it's the same damn thing in my mind. It's the play to keep us divided. My point, though, is that I keep seeing a lot of people fall for what's happening. And so in this conversation, It's what we keep seeing. And of course, I can talk all day about how obviously this stems back to what Israel is driving through this administration. But the idea that you have these same accounts coming out with very minimal information, because that's the narrative being seeded through these same Zionist manipulating accounts, which is this is Muslim terror attack and ISIS. And again, the whole point I was joking about a second ago, which we can easily document, which I'm going to go through again today, is that ISIS, Al-Qaeda, these are proxy elements of the U.S. and Israel. This should not even be a contentious conversation. It is objectively proven. Ben Swan did a documentary years ago that was night and day, or black and white. James Corbett has done a 3-part documentary on the whole background of Al-Qaeda. And guys, I mean, the receipts are transparent. I mean, you could argue that that every aspect or every action is completely dictated or controlled by them, but this is what it is. This is a reality. It's just like we are now proving with what's going on in Syria, what we can see in the Ukraine, what we can see about the funding of Hamas by Israel. This is what these groups do. It shouldn't be even debatable at this point that you can sell that this is a terrorist organization that they're supporting in Syria. And it's the same group that we were all telling you years ago they were supporting in Idlib. It's transparent right now. And so all of this is clear. And if you can keep walking back, hopefully we can come to the conclusion that this is a group that at the very least they're supporting. But if you keep going, you'll find out they basically created and organized this entity to do what they're doing today, to manufacture the support, just like Israel uses Hamas. Right, to justify the separation, to divide and conquer. Anyway, and that doesn't mean that every aspect of Hamas is controlled by Israel, or that the act of armed resistance was somehow illegal. It was protected under international law, despite crimes that were committed after the fact, which should still be held accountable, right? But so my point in all of that is that what's going on in here is the first thing we saw was ISIS, Muslim terror attack. We knew it. Muslims invading this country. That's what immigration brings, like the same mantra. Oh, whoops. And then right away, it turns out, it's a white guy from Fort Bragg. And then, yes, the other guy does have a Middle Eastern sounding name and does have brown skin, but turns out he's also from a U.S. Military base, same base, also rented the car from the same location. All these things everyone's talking about today. And it's just like, and yet still, you got the same people kind of driving the same narrative. One of the examples stood out to me was Nick Sorter, who came out and made that statement. Muslim, basically going, here's Biden saying the biggest threat to our country is white males, MAGA, whatever, which I also disagree with. And then he goes down, today, ISIS, Muslim, attacks our country, Middle East, jihadist terrorism, or whatever. And then 2 hours later, he's over here going, oh my God, they're both from a U.S. base and both for, both. And his point is that, so then why'd you tweet the first one? I'm willing to bet you that gets deleted later, right? Because ultimately it is narrative without due diligence. And just like the next one, for all we know, 2 hours later, that story turned out false too. The point is people like this are just reactionary and narrative, headline, reaction, constantly. And maybe people disagree with that. My point is, though, you can see that ultimately the first point was the narrative, which has now clearly been shown to be at least somewhat undermined. And a lot of the people that are pushing that are still doing so because there's an agenda there. And I'm glad to see a big conversation being had today around like this idea about like whatever people think about like the great replacement theory, or even just getting rid of this like politicized idea and just discussing what it means, which is clearly happening, which is weaponized migration for clear political agendas, which is a very documented historic reality. And Israel's been publicly doing this and talking about it in this country. I mean, it's very transparent, as well as others. I mean, China, you see examples of the same thing, right? But the point is that you can see that if you talk about that and you break it all down, how is it you're blaming Muslims in this, but ultimately saying that so somebody is cultivating an invasion of Muslims for the benefit of clearly not Muslims. I mean, that's objective with what's the byproducts, but then saying they're responsible for it, and to consider every possibility. But if you break these things down, you can clearly see, and if you listen to just about any Israeli politician, they'll tell you that this is exactly what they want to happen. You can see that this is being manufactured through U.S. foreign policy and Israeli foreign policy, causing the influx of destabilized average people. And yes, within that, I'm sure there's examples of whatever agency trying to use that for something, but the vast majority of these people are innocent civilians that are suffering because of our government's foreign policy. And then they blame them for being invaders and so on. And like a good example on the southern border, right around the Texas timeframe, while a lot of even Republicans were calling out that right down the road, there was the gates swinging open in the wind and nobody was there, nobody cared. And Abbott was the Republican governor at the time, like very weird. But the point was that ultimately at that time frame, there was a guy, brown-skinned guy that came through the border and everyone freaked out and he was on video. He was saying things that you'll know me in the future and saying he was from like Palestine and all this different stuff. Very quickly boiled down to the fact that you could prove that he came from, I think it was Azerbaijan or Jordan. Either way, the point was that he was connected to Mossad. This is a documented reality. The guy was connected to Mossad. He lied about where he came from. Coming through the border, I would argue at the behest of Israel. The moment that became a provable point, the whole conversation dropped. So what you telling me it only matters to these people if there's a weaponized element of that, if you can blame it on people you don't like? You know what I mean? It kills me. And so it's not only just about Israel either, but what I'm showing you is this clear choice to ignore certain aspects of it, which I think is the main part of it. And so I think what we're talking about with this New Jersey, not Las Vegas dynamic is that at the very surface of this, I think it's the most obvious investigatory path to go, is this our own government? With all the things we see, like the last thing we should be doing is this is, investigate all of them, but this assumptive direction that it is, because immigration, because brown-skinned people are invading our country. Like, it's just this lazy argument that doesn't even connect with all the facts, And so at the end of the day, you have either CIA or Mossad or some kind of element, in my opinion, that is driving this to justify exactly what we've been seeing. I mean, what does this benefit? How does this in any, of course, all you're going to get is they hate our freedom or they want to kill Trump. And it's like, it's just this same old mantra. If you actually look at the outcome, it is exactly what they benefit from and everything they're trying to accomplish. And at the same time, what you're going to get for the people that think they're supporting the agenda you're talking about, more biometric surveillance, more drones, more invasive surveillance in your life, more control. I mean, all the things we think we're fighting with the Great Reset, all because we have to fight this threat. I mean, they're talking about that. Remember, the drone thing came out right away. They're talking about scanning biometrics or pulling things off your phone with the drones. Rand Paul was talking about it, all because of this hype. It's so transparent the way this is going right now. Last, I'll leave it on, is it's very clear to me that a huge, and I'm starting to wonder whether it's the majority at this point, grouping of conservatives are starting to call this out. Are starting to say, this is what something's wrong. Elon's not our guy. I'm wondering if Trump has been played, if not maybe even wrong himself. I was just in a space last night. I mean, and these were mostly MAGA people, and they were uncomfortable. People don't know what's going on. I'm glad to see that, because we should be calling these things out.
Yeah, Musk is getting some backlash today and yesterday with censoring some people. And, when he says that he's a free speech platform, I will say it's more free speech than other platforms. It doesn't, but to just put...
I could push back on that. I mean, I wouldn't disagree. I would say at best, it's at the same level of things like YouTube and the rest, right? But I could push back on that. I mean, I would say that, because look, it's sectional. I'm still posting all my content on YouTube. The same things that get censored on it's the point is that it's more often than not, most of my content right now is go on YouTube, no problem, right? But I think it's sectional. But I'm sure we all have our own opinions. I'm sure you may have a different how it's been your experience. But I guess my point would be that Twitter is obviously censoring, and you have this behemoth narrative control management group that has argued that's not the case, even though. I mean, you're objective. You've seen it. They've been censoring accounts from the very beginning. Twitter focused. They work with the ADL. The lawsuit that was public, that became public with Elon Musk and everything, they stated in their own lawsuit that they have met over 90% of the government's demands to censor on the account. They said in that lawsuit, he made it very clear that they have met or exceeded all of the requirements of GARM. And despite the weird way that ended up, remember, they partnered with GARM in July before that happened. That was on the record. And then even Mike Benz made clear that despite the fact that GARM essentially was broken up, that the actual mechanism never went away. This was all, it was shadows on the wall, in my opinion, And so to me, I can see, and this is where I'm really going with it, there's censorship, to be clear. I mean, we all just hopefully seen, if you haven't seen it the entire time, it's been clear to me the entire time. But I don't think it's about the same kind of blunt censorship. I think we're in a new realm of this, and I think a lot of people are trying to pick up on this, that we're dealing with something much more nefarious. And he's already been clear about the fact that he's using Twitter, your engagement, all of ours on this platform, to train his artificial intelligence program. He stated that publicly, and that's XAI, which I am convinced is simply the XAI from DARPA that ended in 2021. I mean, it's very transparent. It's the same program. And so he's just this extension of these military programs in my mind. This is the face for it. But either way, the point is it's about using us to very weirdly kind of create outcomes for what they're trying to accomplish. But at the same time, we're being experimented on. This is about corralling, social engineering. It's about predictive programming. I'm of the mind that we are literally engaging with different experiences, not just cultivated ads and your people you follow, but specifically tailored to see, if these things pop, controlled to see if people can be driven into certain circles. And I mean, I'm telling you, this has always been kind of what these things do, but it's on steroids right now. I mean, I would argue point blank, if we think that this is any better than Jack Dorsey's Twitter, then I just don't think we're fully seeing the way this is being used. But I could definitely be wrong.
Yeah, I feel like he's not censoring anything he agrees with. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's kind of where he draws the line. It's like as long as I agree with it, say whatever the hell you want. But if
But
I
free speech, though, if I like it, you know.
people have problems with it, it's like, oh, you are giving free speech. Like the things that are being censored on other platforms, you're letting them say it not because you're a free speech platform per se, but it's because it's stuff you agree with. And
Well, that's interesting though. I don't agree with that. I mean, it's hard to say. I would say that it's just as likely, and this is where my mind goes. Elon, okay, so taking the point of like being the face of these government programs, like it's the same concept the way that I would see that he has been tapped to be the Pied Piper of technocracy. And you know what I keep saying is that they're being played. I mean, a lot of conservatives keep calling this out, like the way he responds, the whole Keck thing he just did. They're starting to feel like they're being made fun of, and I agree. I've been saying that from the beginning. I feel like he's almost without. I don't think he's like deliberately making fun of them, but he feels like he's being what they want, and it's just like belittling. That's the way I look at it. My point though is that clearly that you. I just lost the thread. What was it? The censorship point of it was what'd you just say before that?
so I was saying that it seems like as long as you're
Oh no, I got it. That he likes it, right? Okay, so the point being that I get the very eerie sense that it's him doing that with that too. Like he's presenting that, and that really not that he likes it. I mean, some of it is that I think he's engaging with the content he likes, but it's about trying to create what they said these people would become with the way they set this up. Like, okay, my thoughts. If you remember on like the Azov movement and the way that was organized to essentially be like a trap for, the MAGA, basically Russia influencing MAGA to be racist as white supremacist, like that blew up in their face, I think. That's my opinion. I think that was being laid out and it just didn't connect. And like, I think it's because we called it out, but a lot of other things happened. And all of a sudden on a dime, it was like, wait, never mind. They're not racist and you're confused. It was all we all saw it. It was really disjointed. And so my point is like, that's part of what we're seeing is that Elon Musk is playing the role of creating, or at least trying to create the illusion of creating that all of the Republicans are actually secret Nazis and actually racist. And you see what I'm point? And it's working to a degree. You're a lot of these people are coming out of the woodwork. And I mean, I think we can all acknowledge that there is obviously a very racist veins going through this party. I don't even think it's close to the majority, but it's there. And it has to do with it really came out during the H-1B conversation, right? Where people were like, no. And I've been saying this from the beginning, just no immigrants. I thought we were all in agreement. Immigrants bad. And that's why Elon was like, no, that's not what, there's some good and there's some versions of it where the highest rate. And they were just like, fuck that. It's got to be nobody. And my point was, okay, right there, you can see that, right? And so that is what they're trying to keep people thinking is what all of these people are. We saw it with the red hats being called anti-Semites, racist, and now they're the ones calling other people anti-Semites, which is ridiculous. But, I think it's important to see how that plays out. And so if he can effectively create the illusion that, see, this is what happens. That's the whole narrative is, this is why we can't have nice things, right? Because you guys come out and say Heil Hitler and whatever. And, that like it justifies, even though it doesn't, if you really understand constitutional rights, but to them, it creates justification for censorship, for saying, see, this is what they really are. And so we have to lean more into the I don't see it as left or right, but that's how it's perceived. The left version of we control the paternalism, right? Where we dictate it's in your best interest. You guys are not smart enough to be able to handle free speech. We'll give you the limited speech. I genuinely think that's what it is, even if he doesn't know that. But that's what I mean is I don't think he necessarily likes all this stuff. Like, for example, who knows what the whole thing with the H-1B thing was, but he clearly seemed to like have an emotional reaction, right? He would like, he respond. I just don't feel that was part of an agenda unless, maybe I'm missing something. My point is, if you look back through all the time he's been in control of Twitter, he has leaned into a lot of things that are like borderline considered over the line, whether you might racist or whatever. And that's just, collective an opinion. You guys can decide for yourselves. My point is that seems to be what he in some ways has leaned into, or groups that he's leaned into or followed or rised up with his yes, true, correct responses, like where he just jumps it up into the air. And then yet suddenly these people are like all immigrants bad. And he's like over the top about it, censoring, lashing out. And so I get the sense that maybe he's just not actually okay with that. But the agenda is to kind of cultivate it. Just my personal opinion, But you get what I'm saying is it's a very that's how I see Twitter today. That it's this weird social engineering kind of cultivation of different agendas or using it to seed through these rapidly rising narratives, drones or fog or whatever else, which doesn't mean they're fake at all. But we see how it gets out of hand. I actually think more or not than not today, it's narratives that are actually true at the core, but are meant to look stupid. You know, see what I'm saying? Like a turn the frogs gay dynamic, where ultimately we're talking about a very real thing where atrazine or any kind of endocrine disrupting chemical is bleeding off from factories and causing hormonal disruption in the environment. But that turns into the turn the frogs gay, and it becomes, oh, that's stupid. We're going to ignore it. You know, whether he meant to do that or not. That's how that worked out. And so that's kind of the way I see it playing, is that people end up ignoring it. You know. Anyway, I've ranted long enough, but I think that's important to think about, because it's more a couple steps removed than I think it's been in a long time.
Well, he's been pushing the Tommy Robinson thing recently. He's
The guy's a Mossad agent, man. I'm telling you.
Who's that?
Tommy Robinson.
Oh.
I mean, the guy's very pro-Israel, very like in my opinion, he is working with intelligence, whether he's Mossad specifically or not. That's my opinion. And I think there's a lot of evidence to back that up.
I don't know if that was right from the beginning or in time people are like, hey, we can use this guy. He has
fair. That's fair.
He has incredible influence. He's outspoken. He's fearless. You know, he's not afraid to say his beliefs. I'm definitely against censoring him. You know, I remember
Me too.
years
We
ago,
should be.
when he was getting censored on every platform. I think it was called I can't remember what the show was, but RT had a show where they invited him on and they had a debate with him, and I'm like, this is exactly what we should do when there's
Right.
somebody that you think is dangerous or has dangerous ideas or disagree with, like put them in a chair and across from somebody else who disagrees with them, and they challenge each other's ideas and they question each other's ideas, and let the public make up their own minds instead of you trying to make it for them and saying, hey, this is too dangerous for you to listen to, these ideas are not for you or whatnot.
That's paternalism.
Yeah, and you know what, and he makes, I know he was on Jordan Peterson too, and Jordan Peterson got some shit for having him on. I think there is some concern in all countries, like obviously there's concern about immigration and the type of immigrants are going into your country, and I think a lot of people want to try to hold on to their cultural roots, and if they feel like maybe somebody is infiltrating their cultural roots and not adapting to the country, I can hear that out. I can understand that. I can understand the concerns and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I think in all cases, there's racism in all aspects. I mean,
Oh yeah. And it has to be allowed. The point is that's just we can all say I think being inherently racist for no reason is disgusting, but you have a right to be that way. That's what free speech and liberty and all these things mean, which I know you agree with. It's like you have to be able to have your own thoughts. Which I agree with you, by the way. Like the way it should be done, bring it out, air it out, right? And challenge those bad ideas. I think they're so afraid of people, like they know there's elements that would lean into it just for fun, or just to watch the world burn, for example, or maybe because they are racist, and they're just so terrified of giving those people any, that's what I think. And so, but again, whether you agree with that or not, it comes down to it's wrong to do. It is paternalism. And then eventually the government takes, you give a mouse a cookie, that glass of milk is right behind the corner. That's what's going to happen with the government. They're going to constantly take more steps,
When you look at the Kanye West thing, right? A lot of musicians, a lot of record labels, a lot of very powerful people are Jewish. You can understand when somebody like Kanye West, and not to justify his extremism in his ideas, but trying to understand where they come from. You see a lot of, maybe minorities like himself, maybe being taken advantage of or whatnot. And then you can see how that can mold a dislike of a certain type of person. I'm Portuguese. There's a lot of Portuguese construction companies in town. If you come get hired at a Portuguese construction company and you're not Portuguese and you feel like you're not a part of the clique, or you feel like they treat you poorly or whatever, I can see why, due to that life experience and that small sample of dealing with Portuguese people, it can give you a bad taste, and you can end up molding your perception of Portuguese people. So it's no different than like in Massachusetts. I live near some pretty bad cities like Holyoke and Springfield, Mass, where the Basketball Hall of Fame is. And when you constantly see minorities getting arrested on TV, like my parents, for example, they came to America. I was born in America. I came here when I was a kid. In Portugal, like a black person or a white person, like you're either like they kind of judge you based on your nationality. Like, are you Portuguese or are you French? Because there's like all different shades of of Portuguese and French and Spaniards and whatnot because of obviously all the exploring and obviously having control of some of these African countries like Mozambique and Macau and or not Macau, but Mozambique and Angola. And so when you go back to Portugal, like, you know, if somebody's black and but they speak Portuguese, they grew up in Portugal, like there's no division between that, right? Like it's just like, oh, they're just a darker skinned Portuguese person. And then a lot like my parents, and I'm using my parents as a firsthand example, they come to America and they put on the news, and then every person that's being arrested is a minority. So slowly that feeling that they had towards darker skinned people, you know, is molding and changing into like, oh, now in America they're all bad, you know. And not to say that my parents are like that, but you know, I know people who come to America and you know, I didn't see them as racist by any stretch, but then you could kind of every once in a while something that seems a little bit anti-minority will come out, and you're like, I wonder how much of that has been from the consuming of news media and painting this picture of like, oh, these are the bad people and then these are the good people. And then, you know, and then you go into the much more difficult conversations. I know a guy who worked at a prison with some family members of my wife's family, and a real nice guy, but boy, was he racist against white people. He would, it was wild because he like had no, I don't know if he just didn't know how it was coming off or he didn't care. And that was just truly how he believed. But he would just come out and say it like, hey, I wouldn't want my kids marrying a white person. He's like, I want them to marry within their own race and whatnot. And he would talk about how all of you know, black people's problems are all rooted from white people. And you like when he would talk about it, you could tell that there was some dislike, there's some you know, some anger there. And
well, can I say something real quick? It's interesting because, you know, it's the same problem, obviously, in reverse, but to pinpoint it is, you know, obviously, I mean, look, if you really want to be objective about this and go back to, you know, as far back as you want to look, really, you know, Jim Crow era before, and the reality that it's objectively clear that there was the most disgusting racism that existed in this country. And then we can argue that things changed or slowly evolved into something different, but you know, even let's just saying rapidly between all that time to today, and somehow argue that there's just no remnants of that everything else is just now everything's good and anything else you say, it's all in your mind. Like, it's absurd. It's obvious that there are clear issues that exist, but it's not like it was like then, entirely. But at the same time, to think about what it did to stifle all of these generational families with all that happened for all that time frame. You know what I mean? Like in every possible way. And to say that wouldn't have any lasting effect. Like my point is just, it's absurd to argue that there's not clearly still issues. But my point is that, so in the sense of him saying rooted the white people, whatever you want to think about that, there are valid points to make about how historically there's clear connection. But it's his choice to make that about every white person around him today. So that, in my opinion, makes him not a good person. That makes him, I don't care that is a choice to be, you're bad because of your skin color. Now, if we were saying that, or anybody else was saying that about another race, he would say they were disgusting, racist, not you're good in every aspect of your life besides that. That's not how that works in any other context, right? So in my opinion, that's an example of somebody who would probably be that way in other parts of his life. That's my personal opinion, whether you're black, you're brown, you're anything else. And I think what's interesting is the same thing happens in any other context. So take a white person who has a bad experience with, let's just say with a Portuguese company or whatever. The point is that person, I mean, your experiences in life obviously flavor what you then feel and do in your life. And so if you had many bad experiences with a certain group of people, like anybody would have some kind of an emotional reaction, but the choice would be to not allow that to be any person you meet who looks that way. Like it's a conscious choice as a person to not be. It's like I say every day. You know, every day you have to wake up to choose to be a good person, right? Every day you wake up again, you choose it again. You wake up again, you choose it again until it becomes a part of your nature. And it's the same idea here, right? That you recognize, like, you know, that's not fair. This person is not that guy. This is a person who lives somewhere else, has different experiences, and just because he looks the same, I'm going to give him a fair shot. Or, you know, this looks the same, we shouldn't do it, I'm going to give him a fair shot instead. And I know you agree with this. So it's hard because we always want to overlook certain things. As we can all see today, there are certain areas that are, you know, thou shall not pass. There are certain areas that's okay. Go ahead and make fun of them, you know, and it's hypocrisy, whether that's white or Indian or, you know, whatever all these different overlaps are, depending on where you are in the world. Like, funny example, in Hawaii, I lived there for over 2 years. And obviously, as a white person, it doesn't bother me. I mean, I have different life experiences. So I would first point that out. If I lived through an entire generational difference, maybe that would change my perspective, but doesn't bother me. I don't think about it. I don't let their words bother me, no matter, because I'm Puerto Rican or whatever else. It doesn't bother me. My point, though, is that it's everywhere. I get called a howly or racist terms all the time, which just means white today, basically. But it's also just other categories, though. Interestingly enough, Portuguese is something that's very, very, there's very negative about that in Hawaii, like almost in a joking sense, but like that's something that's made fun of all the time. And so the point is clearly that you can see that there's allowable levels of this, right? Or I was going to say something else about it, I just forgot. But the point being that ultimately, I was going to make a point there. I lost it. But anyway, it's interesting to see different locations in the world that have different perspectives. And, it really just all comes down to choosing not to allow that to be the case or choosing not let it bother you, And so I would say that those people who allow that are, probably allowing it elsewhere in their life. But go ahead.
Remember that I believe he was a filmmaker, that black filmmaker who went to go live or meet KKK members and then became friends with them, and then a bunch of them end up like leaving the Klan because of it. And it's funny because he, instead of creating this divide where like now you fight hatred with hatred, right? Instead of being like, okay, these people hate me, so I'm going to hate them. He's like, let me get to know them and let me see where this hatred comes from. And then little by little, he became friends with these people, and they end up liking him, and many of them left the Klan. And that's the thing, like
That's powerful.
The understanding of others is something that we don't put enough time into. Where like Kanye, for example, like I'm trying to understand, like, okay, where does this worldview come from? And then I'm like, okay, I can kind of understand. And then like, okay, if I'm a Jewish person, where does this worldview of being afraid of, everybody turning on us, or this dislike of us, this fear of maybe that going to, taking the next step. Like I can understand that too, where a Jewish person is like, hey, all this college protesting is scaring the shit out of me, and so
I can tell you what I think about it. I mean, I think it's very obvious the Zionism is the core root of that problem. I mean, and this is becoming a prominent point in Jewish circles today. I mean, it's day by day, I'm seeing far more prominent Jewish people in the world, actors, politicians, or Jewish organizations, or, Orthodox Jewish communities that are standing up at large and saying Zionism does not represent Judaism. Like, I mean, the point is that all of what we're talking about, we're Tommy Robinson, the immigration, all this stuff. Like, so it's interesting is that people who see, like, so taking Kanye West, I would argue, now this is my opinion, take it for what you will. I think this is all backed up by factual information, but it's my opinion, is that ultimately you can see that Zionism as an ideology has made it's designed to utilize different things to basically justify its existence. Now, Judaism was its core point. Now, a couple things to begin with. Let's remember that Herzl, the founder of the Zionist organization, was an atheist. That's a documented fact. You could argue he changed because of some X, Y, and Z, but he's also has journals that you can look up that have all these very anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish comments. It's interesting. And ultimately, the original organization was mostly Christians. So it's interesting to think about. Now, today, the point is that most Zionists are actually Christian, not support Zionists that are Christian, but that are Christian Zionists. That's important. So when we call out Zionism as a problem, the argument that you just hate Jewish people is just factually incorrect. I mean, I guarantee there's an overlap no matter what you're talking about. That's always the case. There's always going to be somebody that's racist or somebody that, blah, blah, blah. The reality, though, is that, at least from my perspective, but I think most of this conversation is highlighting that Zionism is this problem. Now, Kanye West, I would say, is my example of somebody who has fallen for that trap, where Zionism has occupied this idea, right, has taken this idea of Judaism, used the name Israel because it comes from the Bible, right? The Balfour Declaration from the UK government gave them this territory, right? This is not God-given. They're genetically engineering a red heifer to argue this is a God-sent thing. Like this is Zionism, right? And that's why Orthodox Jewish communities, a lot of them today, are going, this is blasphemy. Like, God has not come back. God did not give this territory to you. Like, and you guys are fronting as that to capture the minds of all these people, and as well as Christians. And so the point of Kanye is that, or rather the point of Zionism is using the idea that it is Judaism. Therefore, you create this idea that you have to protect yourself from all the hate from Jewish people. But then it overlaps with the ADL or even AIPAC and different groups of the past and Israel in general. I mean, documented by many different groups, and I'm going to go over it more today, manufacturing hate. manufacturing things that drive people to hate Jewish people, manufacturing hate events. The ADL has been caught more than once literally manufacturing Nazi marches. I have articles from mainstream posts that go back 20 years saying ADL literally caught faking a Nazi march in, was it Chicago? I forget. I'm going to go over it more today. And so it's like, it's just incredible. And so the point is, why would they do that? Why would all these different Zionists during this last discussion fake being stabbed in the eye with a flag or fake, that doesn't mean that there's not racist activity. There is. But the point is that you can clearly see an engineered thing going on here. And so that is what I think people like Kanye and the rest, or maybe they're part of this lie, but are caught in that manipulation. So it drives them, because it's easy to look at this without diving further and go, well, it seems to be all Jewish people, even though there's not. There's a lot of Christians involved in the same dynamic, but that's because that's how this is being directed. Manufacturing billboards in New York that makes it seem like Jewish people are the one, we're Jewish and proud in front of New York. And it's like, what is that? What is that? Why is that there? Right? Like, what's the reason for that in the middle of all this? There's like, the point is that Jewish people in New York are going like, I'm not afraid of these people. I don't feel threatened. And this is about trying to push that in your face in order to make you think that that is the focal point. That's my opinion of that. Either way, the bottom line is about clearly, provably using these populations and then driving people like Kanye to think that's the focal point of the problem. So then he becomes an advocate, stopping one step short of realizing that Zionism is using these groups, and goes, Jewish people are the problem, or however he's framing that, which then Zionism goes, see, we told you. He's why we have to exist, because they're all going. I mean, you look at places like Israel in general. I mean, Israel is essentially one gigantic human shield. You've got settlements built out illegally on literally illegal land, not Gaza or West Bank, which are also all legal occupied territory. But I'm talking about all the rest of Israel. That stems from the origin of Palestine. And these illegal settlements, which, by the way, even the settlements, not even proper Israel, but the settlements around it, were once part of what was going to be part of the 67 borders. So those, like, if you even could call it that, doubly illegal. So they're on these settlements, and they've built out all these illegal settlers that have come from New York and the rest of the place of the world that have no real ancestral connection to the land there, other than them taking it and calling it the home of the Jews and ultimately living there, and then keeping like the IDF headquarters in the center of Tel Aviv. And clearly the point is that when you know you're illegally occupying, that gives the occupied the legal right of armed resistance. We've talked about this. That's the Geneva Conventions. So that means effectively you've surrounded yourself with people who are your human shields. These are the Jewish population that believe if you can't realize by now that you're more safe as a Jew, or you're more unsafe as a Jew in Israel than literally anywhere else in the world, I could go off forever. The point is that I think Kanye and the rest are falling for that and then becoming inadvertent tools for why that needs to happen. And go look at someone like Dan Cohen, for example, who's Jewish himself, who's been an excellent journalist, who's been breaking this down for a long time, or somebody like Zachary Foster, who has a PhD from Princeton on Palestinian history. It's the receipts are transparent. The guy has like a seven thread compilation, and each thread has like 20 different tweets on it that goes through each example of the different lies of Zionism, the origin point, what they've done, the Nakbas, everything. It is exactly what is now becoming clear to the world. If we can't look over there and recognize that every factual point you can look at demonstrates open genocide, not just genocide, but gleeful genocide, praising the genocide, posting videos, wearing their clothes, signing on the wall. Today, women in Israel just going, I don't care how many civilians you kill. Nobody should exist in Palestine. Like, this is culturally immersed. But I would still point out, I do not think it's all Jews or all Israelis. But it seemed like the U.S. government has convinced Americans, and it's dissipating as well, that we should just all want war and we can take what we want. It's the same game. A lot of Israelis have fallen for it, but more and more are beginning to grow past it and call it out, and the world is beginning to see it as they're supporting ISIS in Syria and occupying land in Lebanon and taking all of Syria. It's just transparent what's happening.
Yeah, it's fascinating, because what happens is that you manipulate or you create true believers, even though the people who are orchestrating it aren't true believers themselves. There was the thing, as I'm sure you remember and my listeners remember, the 9/11 hijackers, and how they were at like strip clubs and they were, drinking and whatnot, but yet they were painted as, Muslim extremists. And
well, they make that argument about how they're allowed to, which is, you could look it up. So in the act of whatever they were doing, jihad or whatever you call it, like whatever the point is, they're allowed to drink and do this like as a camouflage. But they make the same arguments for other things. Like there's a point about that for like the Mossad overlap. But I think it's a point to make, but I still don't think those people are the focal point, quite frankly.
Yeah, well, I think they also purchased the book Islam for Dummies or something like that. But
Yeah, there's so many crazy points like that.
my point is, I guess, is that they will, it's no different than like Israel and October 7th. Like they obviously, once that happened, now they're murdering and killing way more people than, ever died on October 7th. A lot of people initially, even right off the bat, said like, hey, how did you not know of this? How did you not, stop this? And then as you start connecting the dots and things start unraveling, you realize like, okay, their over the top reaction to that action makes you think that they either let it happen or had a hand in it. And historically, that stuff has always happened, went from Pearl Harbor, 9/11, and whatnot. So, the thing is, you do create these extremists where, I've talked to people from Israel, a guy who his son actually plays soccer for the same soccer club that my son does. And he's from Israel, born in Israel, raised in Israel, served in the military as, as you have to. He was so passionate about this topic, and he's like, F these people and F those people, no. And you could tell like, okay, this would work in your benefit if you're trying to get an uproar, right? And it reminded me of September 11th, like the hatred towards Muslims, right? It's like you paint the picture that like, okay, these people represent all Muslims, and all Muslims are like,
Same model.
and yeah, and so the thing is with all these examples of racism in different cultures and tribes and whatnot, is that the danger is always using it as a tool to paint somebody who's slightly different than you, ideology wise or skin color wise or culturally slightly different, painting them as the other. And
that's the same for Jewish people, by the way, right? The same thing in reverse. It's the same point either way you look at it. That's important.
yeah, well, without a doubt. And that's the thing, like all these things become weaponized. And like that black filmmaker who end up meeting and hanging out and befriending some KKK members. Like once you actually meet these people and you try to humanize them, you realize like it's not hard to humanize them because they are humans. They're humans who've been lied to or tricked into believing something. And Kanye, I think is like you said, no different. Where like I think he maybe had a bad experience or whatever, and then he's become weaponized, and then you paint the picture of anybody who says anything bad about Zionism or whatever, like now they're automatically lumped in with Kanye.
Right.
And
Exactly.
you brought it up earlier today with the gay frogs thing, right? You take a little bit of truth and then you make it radical, you make it sound insane, you make it sound, how many times have we heard people lump in real conspiracies with flat earthers and other type of arguments? It's like, okay, that's not the same thing. It's not, I remember years ago having a little debate with my brother-in-law, and he's like, well, you were right about that, but you believe a lot of ridiculous conspiracies. I'm like what? And then he's like, well, and I'm like, exactly. I'm like, what happened is like the media and, they've convinced you that all these topics and all these worldviews and all these perspectives are lumped in, and it's the same people who believe this, that believe that, and the same people who believe that, that believe that, and it's like, so what happens is there's no critical thinking skills involved in processing the information and these subjects and topics, because it's already the decision's made for you. It's like, okay, if you believe that vaccines can cause harm, you must also believe the earth is flat, even though they're completely different people who are passionate about those topics. I mean, the vaccine issues, it's like a lot of it's people who have had personal experiences, people who mothers who are passionate about it because their child has been harmed from it or whatnot. And then flat earthers, like it's, a lot, you meet those people, they're seem to be motivated by something else. Some of them are motivated by their religious perspectives and wanting to use a flat earth conversation as a way of molding their worldview, as in like, this is another reason why I believe this is why we're here and this is how the universe works and whatnot. So it's like completely different tribes. And it becomes very difficult to talk to people because, and I think since COVID, we've said it over and over again, where like the one good thing is that I never thought I would live to see a day where the average person can hear a anti-vax debate and actually consider the fact that they could be harmful. Like, for the longest time, it was, and again, and this is how they brainwash people, because at such a young age, they convince you that you never question vaccines. You believe that they're good for you, and they've done all this positive things throughout world history. But people don't realize, like, it's a belief. It's faith. You have a belief in the experts. You have faith in these experts, and they tell you at a really young age to never question them. And it's no different than, kind of being raised in a cult where it's like, hey, this is our leader. This is our accepted worldview. You do not think outside of these guidelines, and then you're stuck there. And to me, it was like really hard to get people to kind of break through that. And then luckily, COVID, and not just vaccines, but I think a lot of topics, when people are openly talking about the World Economic Forum and that there's elites and like people who never thought about these things are now really considering these ideas of like, hey, you know what, like, maybe there are people pulling the strings. Maybe we are all being manipulated in one way or another. But we do have to consider the fact that we even ourselves, like, we're and I know you're very good at it, and I try to do it too. Like, I even question my own worldviews and like, hey, is everything a psyop? Is everything a part of this greater plan, or am I seeing too much? And that's why I brought up the kind of the current events things that are going on, even with the CEO of the healthcare company, the insurance company, who got murdered. Like, I'm still undecided. I'm like, I don't know if it's the whole story seems very unusual and weird that this guy just kind of shows up and in a McDonald's and just chilling with all the evidence to kind of lock him up, and yet, like, maybe it's possible that it could be just the way it looks, but because we've been lied to so often, I don't know. I have a good friend of mine who's retiring. He's a detective, and we're talking about it, and he's like, hey, sometimes you're trying to rationalize things that you can't rationalize because it just, there's, and I get that. Like, I could understand that perspective of like, okay, maybe I'm trying to make sense of something that just doesn't make sense. Maybe it was a random act of violence. Maybe it was just a person snapping. But when we've been lied to so many times, when we've been manipulated so many times, when everything seems to be a part of a greater plan to sway public perception one way or another, or, and sometimes it takes a while to start connecting those dots. It takes a while before like a event happened that you're like, oh, okay, this event happened because slowly it started rolling things in this direction. And now I can see, the whole how this sparked a conversation that led to, universal basic income or universal health care or whatever, whatever it may be. And as we know, like, there's no lengths they aren't willing to go to get what they want. So killing a innocent person is not hard to believe that they would do because they kill innocent people all the time.
Right. Well, that's in that time, that circumstance, that's where you question everything, right? I mean, this is what I was saying for the longest time, right? And it's important we talk about that. The CEO aspect is one story that I just ended up not really even getting into because just at my cursory glance, it did not. There's a lot of these stories these days that kind of, for some reason, have like more partisan draw, and they get kind of tapped by the partisan conversation. And like you're saying, they just start. Which, rightly so. If you've got free time, we should pick apart every topic. Why not, right? Take your time, dig through these things. But it becomes like this, the objective is to make it a story. And you start parsing through these things and you go, wait, he's got this cup that has this name of a business on it that, oh my God, that person that works there is tied to Peter Thiel. And you know what I mean? And maybe it means everything. But if you don't have a point, like a starting point, and all you're doing is looking for weird anomalies that then you graph out, and then, the story is that these things might mean something, like, that's not a story. That's a bunch of, it could be, but at the moment it's a bunch of hypothetical subjective things that don't necessarily come to, like, you want to find something, you're going to find something. You know what I mean? And it doesn't mean there's nothing there. But again, I haven't even dove that far into that story. So I'm not saying this from like experience on that topic, but I do see this a lot in this field, and it's interesting, like you said, though, is that, you get to this point where, if that's the case, you don't like settle on the hypothetical, which is what a lot of the partisan does, where it becomes like, it is like this floating narrative idea that becomes the norm. And then if you deviate from that, then you're on the other side. Or if it turns out not to be that, it's because they hid the whole story when you don't even have anything that proves the origin point. It's constant. We all see that if we're objective about this. So it is really fascinating, and I think that it overtakes these conversations. But like with the drone, for example, I mean, there were drones. I mean, that's been ongoing. We can see them in many cases. I mean, some of them were old videos. Some of them were star and constellations. And that same thing is my point. It happens every time. But there were some that were real. So the point is, what was that, right? Was that one of the 13 things that Alex Jones was certain they were day to day, that changed every day, which kept, I'm being facetious. I mean, I think it was like at least 6 times. It was, we confirmed it's this. And then it went on to something else, and a lot of people are doing that. My point is that where did it end up? I guess we still don't know, right? It was just drifted in the background and but we want drones to protect us. And guess what? Palantir's got new drones rolling out and we're going to air that commercial at the Navy game. And, it's just like, it just seems so lazy, but it ends up, the narrative becomes whatever they last settled on, right? So I see some people still arguing that it's because it was Iran and they're coming after us and we need to protect ourselves. I see some people still saying that it was nuclear sniffers looking for bombs from Russia, which each one of these things, Alex at one point or the other was certain was the case. It's crazy. But so I think that's what keeps happening and they just kind of settle on it. And so that's what's super dangerous. Like the fog is another one that I haven't gone too far into, but it's interesting to me. There's a lot of potential overlaps, like we talked about with nanotech, or even historically, apparently this has happened more than once, where these like weird fogs roll in and people get sick. I was reading more about that, like historically, like going back 100 years, like in the UK, there's one. It's weird, but that could be an example of this being used. Whatever this is, at a different time in history. Fascinating. But my point, though, is that it just gets it's buried in partisan nonsense. And again, that's what free speech looks like. But I think it's being weaponized against us in an effort to kind of drive us back away from that. That's what I actually believe. But that it gets so bombed in this just nonsense that it drives me to do exactly what we were just talking about, where it goes, okay, like, you see some evidence. It seems interesting. I'm already kind of suspicious, but then I see the usual suspects just bomb the field with, oh my God, look at this new thing. Look at the fog and they're all kind of capturing the same kind of videos that were popping up and adding new narratives. And my source says this. And I spoke to Northcom and they said, whatever it is. And it just becomes this kind of mob of the story that I guess my point is that I am almost erring on the side of, even the evidence seems to be backed up. I'm still cautious. And I'm saying it's like a detriment. Like it's hard for me to come past this partisan game because I'm worried we're going to get tricked. And so that's what I mean about like irritatingly objective. It's for me, it's like, I almost want to, some cases I'm like, I'm just still going to wait a day because this seems to line up, but I've seen these things fall apart the next day after the part. It's the same kind of partisan push and the same draw. And, the left has the same version of these things. Right now, the right is the new incoming power. And so it's got a lot of momentum and focus, but it's very strange. So it's, but I wanted to make a point about the same kind of thing about the frog, though. You made the point about the frog turning frogs gay kind of dynamic. And what I want to say, though, about everything we're talking about right here is that nonetheless, no matter what it is, no matter if everyone is like, we're going to go lie to them today and we're going to trick everybody, and it's still your fault. If you choose to not do your due diligence, if you choose to not go through the process and check it or if it comes to a point to where all you have is that person saying they know for sure, you don't know for sure. So if you share that, that's not their fault. That's your fault, right? And that's the same thing I tell myself. That's why I'm so careful about these things in some cases. It's, to make it clear, when Alex Jones came out and going, the frogs are gay, and you were like, oh, Alex is stupid. That's a dumb story. I'm not going to look at it. That's your fault, right? You got tricked. Not Alex tricking you. You fell for it because you decided to let him be that, whether he wants to be that or not. And I think that happens with Joe Rogan all the time. Whether Joe Rogan is choosing, with his intent is to deceive or not, whatever you think, that now it's become from the left mostly, which is their fault, that if Joe Rogan talks about it, therefore the opposite is true. And it's like this lazy, I'm sure you've seen it, that happens a lot today, more than I've ever seen, more than usual lately on both sides of the partisanship, where we're allowing that to drive what we believe. It's very cultish, right? Very echo chamber, and it's most of these groups right now. I think it's kind of terrifying because a lot of them are the ones calling everything out everywhere else and then kind of choosing to not look at the censorship when Elon does it or, to whatever else. It's frustrating, but I'm thinking more people are seeing it than ever.
Yeah. So the New Jersey drones, do you have an opinion on that? Or do you think it is a mix of things? And I mean, do you think it could be some PSYOP for something else? Because I mean, for it to be, they're having hearings and literally saying nothing in these hearings. And I just have a hard time believing that they don't know what's going on. And Donald had that interview where he said that he seemed pretty certain that the government knew what was going on and didn't tell us. And
also very politically advantageous for him to say that, but he might,
yeah. I mean, he obviously he was president. He probably has some friends that maybe got him that information. But it does seem a little weird because I'm like, what are you setting up for? Like, what is,
Right.
are you going to blame China? Are you gonna, are you going to blame Iran? Like,
That's what I think.
you think so?
I mean, that right now that seems to be most likely, but who knows? We're guessing, right? Based on different data points. But to me, it seems obvious, like Vance and Trump came out really hot about Iran. Israel is already like standing on their conquered Syria going, Iran, you better start getting rid of your bad guys. Like it's obvious that they're building, not despite the obvious long-term agenda that Israel's been screaming every 30 seconds about going after Iran. It's very clear that's what they're building towards. And it's also very clear that Israel has packed out Trump's administration and that they're having complete influence on the outcome. That's the last point, is my opinion, but I think that's very obvious if we're objective about it. And so I think that's where this goes. So I think that whether it's a joint effort, your point, I think, is very important to think about. Are we really of the mind that they would ever let this happen, right? There'd be some mysterious flying thing when in other cases they take extremely wild and belligerent action because of the hint of some national security threat. It doesn't make any sense. So if this was something they were unaware of, I'd argue they would have already shot it down. I mean, I think that's very clear based on just the worry that it could be a foreign enemy. Like that's just what everyone was pointing out, right? But then the idea that they go, no, they're not a threat. Okay, then what the fuck? Well, I forget if we can cuss on the show, but then what is it? What is this dynamic then? We're just going to let it go? And also, let's realize that going back to Trump's administration or before, this is not new. This has been going on in smaller pockets for a very long time. So Trump is aware, and maybe that's why he knows but won't say. I guess that would make sense. Maybe he's respecting for the first time national security where it doesn't interest his ego. That'd be my opinion. But either way, the point is that ultimately he may know and may not want to tell you, but it's obvious that this doesn't line up with anything. Like if it's aliens, I don't see how that would make sense if that you even think that's possible, right? But maybe there's, again, the point is we don't really know. I guess cut to the chase to what I think. I think at the end of the day, Iran seems like the most likely culprit. Obviously, I think you can see my opinion that I think it's obvious that Israel is playing a major role in what's happening in this country right now. For a long time they have. And so that means that I think it's about rationalizing, creating the justification for that. And even if it was another country, realize that still works for the U.S. agenda, which is, I don't know how we don't piece together the obvious direction with the timing of all of it. The drones, again, and more than we've seen in the last few pockets, over military bases or different things, all of a sudden it gets really focused on. The partisan field goes absolutely apeshit about this for weeks. And all of a sudden, like at the same time, we see this very quiet Orwellian drone legislation go through. What a coincidence. At the same time, we see Palantir tweeting about how their new drones are going to be coming out soon. They air the commercial during the Navy game where at that time, everyone's freaking out about drones. I mean, come on. You could argue that it was them just trying to take advantage of momentum. That would make sense, right? Everyone's talking about drones. Let's push our drones. But if you can't then see the obvious connection to Palantir in Trump's administration or Palantir with Israel, where they're literally working with their AI systems to help them commit their genocide, I have to at least ask the question about whether it was simply engineered to allow them to roll out what they're going to be using for 1,000 different agendas, whether it's the biometric scan in and out surveillance system for your border, which applies to everybody within the 100-mile non-constitution zone, which is Maine and New York and all sorts of areas. So it's not just the border and people coming over. Let's remember what that actually means. Or the idea of just pre-crime and surveillance in the country, right? Or how about the mass deportation? How do we think that's going to functionally work? Well, they're going to use drones and artificial intelligence and digital IDs. And so, everything we're talking about. And if you don't think that's the case, they've basically made that clear. But the good guy version, don't worry. It's Elon's version, so it'll all work out, It's that's what I think this is going to amount to, is that it's going to be from the foreign policy part of it, it'll be leveled towards Iran or maybe some, Hezbollah, whatever. Still, for them, the same conversation to make it about Iran. And then, but whether that is really comes to fruition, maybe that falls apart, because I really do think they're losing control of the narratives in a lot of different ways. I still think it's going to be used just from what we saw to roll out what we're talking about. Because let's not forget, Rand Paul came out right away, which good on him for doing it, and was like, look at this fucking bill they just put through. It's like, and if you remember, they were talking about using drones to be able to use facial ID, biometrics, and even scan your phones. scan like an entire room for phone data for the risk of other, which, by the way, how that even connects with the drone conversation. The point is that right there belies the reality of what they're trying to do. But the first point was about, because of the risk of the drones, that we're going to pass our drone legislation. But then it goes on to make clear that they can just scan up everything. But we promise, we won't take your information and show it to anybody. That's what I think it all comes down to. But there's a lot of other ways you could take that to get into, more nightmarish, things that people call conspiracy theory. But I think that's the most obvious way we just discussed.
Yeah, this reminds me, there was a Radio Lab episode years ago where they documented a story about a city or town that implemented surveillance by these drones. And what would happen is that these drones would fly over the city or the town nonstop, constantly taking pictures. And what would happen is that if anything happened, like a car accident, robbery, whatnot, they can go back and just, rewatch the video, or take a look at the pictures and figure out, who walked into the house before it got robbed, who did this, who that, and it worked. But apparently the city or town eventually ended up saying that, the price for security was actually not worth, this extra, this.
I wouldn't have predicted that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and that's what that's why, and it was a Radio Lab episode, and that was kind of the end of it. Was they ended with saying that, like, hey, basically it worked. Like, they were solving crimes, they were figuring out who was actually to blame for car accidents and stuff like that. But the price was too great for the city, and they decided that, like, the loss of privacy just gave everybody kind of an uneasy feeling that they couldn't get over. And so the drone thing, and that just, for all this drone talk, kind of reminded me of that past episode that I didn't think about in a long time.
What was the year on that? If you remember what the year was that was taking place?
Well, the episode definitely came out way before COVID. It was, it was. I'll try to look it up.
No, it's not important. I mean, my point would be simply that if that came out in even 2020 or 2019, let's remember that even in the United States, there's pretty ubiquitous surveillance. Right. I mean, the cameras in the lights, for example, they've been there a lot longer than we realize, like, despite that becoming a more common conversation, or different, CCTV dynamics or ATM cameras. Like, what's interesting is that to me starts to feel a little bit like BS, right? Like, not like the idea is it was a predictive programming, social engineer. Like, let's see how people respond. Like, it's a kind of a trial balloon, because I don't think for a second they would ever quibble about the price. I think it's about ultimately trying to create the narrative that, well, look, it all worked perfectly. We're just not ready for it. You know what I mean? Like, my point is, I think that there is, what was it? What was the year? 2015. Okay, maybe you're getting to the point to where it's hard to remember when that really started to roll out in earnest, but I would still argue that it's hard to. I think that there was probably already pretty, depending on the town too, I guess, where the town was. If it's rural, maybe not. But anyway, I'm worried about that because this is where it's going. Right. I mean, it's the same thing I say about, like, deep fakes, for example, which is the same thing. It's like this. I'm, like, waiting for that shoe to drop. I don't know how it hasn't yet. You know what I mean? Like, how in the world have we not seen, like, some major scandal where it's either that's not me, it's a deep fake and it is them, or it's like a Trump video where he's doing something terrible and it's actually a deep fake and they can't decide. Like, how in the world has that not happened yet? You know what I mean? It's crazy. Same kind of thing with this. It's like, we're just kind of waiting for the reality of this to kind of roll out in reality, like the drone, like the dystopian movie dynamic that we've clearly been kind of predictive programming kind of prepared for, where you will have drones, you will have robots and different things in the streets. And I don't know why anybody wants this world. That is not a world of freedom. That is a world of paternalism, where they argue that has to happen because whatever threat we told you about is right around the corner, whether it's about, like, the Judaism, Zionism dynamic, or the idea that we're Muslim terrorists are just around the corner, which is by being literally engineered by Israel and Zionism, Mossad, those different things. It's a nonstop thing. But the point is creating the fear for you, whatever the new boogeyman is of today, whether Hamas coming in from the southern border, whatever, which makes no sense, to get you to go, I want that. I want you to do this. Take away my freedom, my liberty, give me some perceived security. And we know how that quote goes, hopefully. You know, you remember the quote, like the classic founding. Yeah, the point being is that we just can't make that choice, man. We cannot exchange these things. Otherwise, we deserve neither. And I really do believe that. I think that we have to err on the side of liberty, or your principles, what we believe in, especially when it becomes hard. Same with free speech.
It's something I haven't heard you discuss much, or maybe I've missed it. But I'm kind of curious on your thoughts because it's something that, like I said, I haven't heard you really hit on much. If it like, what is your opinion, not on the drone story itself, but obviously throughout the last couple years, it sounds like the UFO conversation has become much more something that people are entertaining much more seriously. It's a topic that for years people would ask me like, "Hey, how come you haven't done a show on this? Why?" And I'm like, "Because there's nothing to talk about." I'm like, okay, people saw something, but as time went by, and I had what's his name, Ralph Blumenthal, I believe is his name, who's a part of that New York Times story that kind of made a lot of waves, and it seems like a lot more people, higher ranked people, are talking about it and whatnot. And then it leads to all these other conversations of like, okay, is it supernatural? Is it spiritual? Is it, is there another life that is living parallel with us? Like, for example, some people believe that there could be life underneath the ocean, right? Because there's been sensors that have spotted things moving at a speed that no human-made thing could move at underneath the ocean, almost moving like there's no resistance, that type of thing. What is your worldview on this? Like, are you a person who entertains the idea of like, is it other dimensional? Is it this dimension, but some type of yeah, because it is a topic that I haven't heard you dive too deep into, or at least, like I said, if you have, I've missed it. But I'm just curious because you are a type of person who thinks critically about things, and I'm sure you have zoomed out and asked those larger questions of like, what are we doing here? Who is a creator? Is there a creator? Is it a simulation? Is it all these type of things? What is your worldview in regards to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've talked about it. A few times, immersive in some cases, but not as much as other topics. But I've definitely gone into it reasonably deep on a couple of occasions over the years. But you posed a couple of interesting thoughts when just the way you described that right now. I actually just texted you a link. Well, you don't have to bring it up if you don't want, just so you can look at it later. It's a series that Matt Arrett has started. I think I keep saying this. It was supposed to be yesterday, but I'm going to be posting his part 3 soon. And it's a part 1 and 2 are out already. And it's about like the history. The title is the Century of UFO PSYOPs Exposed, part 1. It's from the War of the Worlds to Lawrence Rockefeller's Disclosure Project. And the point in the article is not necessarily to make the case that aliens don't exist, right? But more so to highlight very clearly that they have been faked, right? That our government has used like psychological operations, like he goes into the reality of the kind of like build up to them trying to like almost recreate like a new like religious, like kind of like the new age time direction, like these are like engineered kind of manipulations that the government have kind of manufactured is the argument. And this is like another version of trying to create like a new religion, the main point is going far back to the idea of this, which kind of dovetails with like the Project Blue Book and Blue Beam, is the idea of saying like that, or thinking that this will drive us to essentially support a one world government, which makes sense, right? It's the same kind of idea. And so, I sent you the link. Was that the right? Oh, that's good. Click that, go down a little bit.
Yeah. I just went to, so people, if you're watching, if you want to go to The Last American Vagabond is where I am right now. And then he does have a whole team of people, some familiar names that I'm sure you're familiar with, like Derek Bros and Whitney Webb. And then here's Matt's page. And this is an easy way to get all their work if you want to see what they're contributing to the website.
Nice. There's part 2 right there. Either one, you can click the part. I think part 1's a little bit further down. Either way, the point of it is really just going over all the different information, and so about the real the fakes that are there, right? But anyway, what I was saying was okay. So the point being is that that's not the same as saying that they're mutually exclusive, right? But so my opinion on this is interesting. Is that I think I've said this just the other day. Is that if what we know or understand about space is true. And I do think that's a big if. It's the same point to make about vaccinology, because I think we should very much be standing back and going, just because we were all taught the same thing does not therefore make that the reality. We like people are coming to terms with that around the entire vaccinology conversation. My point is always in that vein is that, if what we know about it is correct, I would argue that there is some vein in that where we could use it in a moral way without trying, that might help people. That's where I would leave it, because if I don't even know if we understand how that actually works, or even if these things are really what we're fighting. So in the context of space, it's the same point, right? It's that, if what we understand about space, or if it is even what we think it is true, and I just think that's an objective thing we should always start with, then what my point would be is that I think it's like a mathematical reality that there's going to be something else going on out there. And so I think that's important to think about. But for all we know, we live in something we don't even understand, that it's not the reality. But what's important to think about is that even if that's the case, our government is still kind of manufacturing these illusions to get us in a very clear position. But so that being the case, where I think it's certainly possible, but I know they've lied to us, you asked the point about dimensional. It's interesting is that that's a very different conversation, right? I think like David Icke and them have talked a lot about that, like the dimensional aspect of it, because that's not something that we should, I guess it's the same point to make. If what we understand about things like CERN, for example, are actually real, and I don't know why we would just blindly accept that what they tell us is real these days, the argument is that that's a very real dynamic. I mean, they have publicly stated, and I still make this point, and people like roll their eyes. I'm like, guys, they reported this. It was like mainstream media that they literally reported that they were able to for lack of a better word, whatever the terminology they use, like reach in and like pull things back over from like the other dimension using CERN. Like this is that, however they said it, that's what they reported. And I thought that was I'm like, that doesn't even seem real to me. It seems crazy. And how do we not think about the potential consequences? Like for a fun thought experiment, if you think Mandela effect is real, maybe that's why it's happening. Like maybe they're messing with the way things work. I don't know. I don't think that, but I'm just saying it's an interesting thought. But so it's interesting to think about that dimensional aspect, which is very different than whatever you might think about like aliens from outer space. Like now we're talking about like potential like alternate realities that are same as us, or another dimension entirely, which is just like, how does that even make sense? Like that would mean something that is potentially like the different laws of physics, like different, like, it's a mind-blowing thing to think about. And so that's where things like that, you just have to leave it there. Like I would argue, if we think that's possible, then of course, like that seems like a logical possibility that there would be something that could eventually come over. And then and I'll get into the government side of it in a second, where I think that lines up. But then like your creator aspect of it, same thing though. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Like I'm a Christian, and I can stand back and objectively think about this in outside of our man-made scriptures, which I do believe there's a historical context to this and that overlaps with what I believe in. But I still can acknowledge as an objective researcher that was still things written down by human beings. So it's important to think about that, right? And whether that might change what we I just have, my true belief goes back to something that supersedes any human beings or organized religion. I believe in God. Like that's my point on it. And I think that through human beings, religion has been very manipulated, bastardized, lied about. I think that's objective history. Look at the Catholic Church and the popes and different cardinals throughout history that have been power-hungry maniacs. You know what I mean? It's just that's an important thing to think about. My point, though, is that all that is to say that we could argue that the idea of what we understand about the stories we tell ourselves about the creation and so on aren't unique to just this planet. Like why we should be able to consider that, right? Or even like, and not to get too abstract about it, but like the idea that maybe if what we're talking about is just other life out there, if you believe that, and maybe that's still in the realm of what we believe is God. These are just abstract philosophical things, but I think that's an interesting thing to think about, right? Is that maybe that's just the real extension of the real breadth of this. But anyway, all of that's to say the question about what they are, is that I wouldn't dismiss any real thing that I could verify, right? If I came out and there was something, I'm like, okay, everything I can do personally seems to line up. And people that I respect, for example, it's everything that I would go, okay, well, let's engage with this. While still going on, I'm going to be very, very, very skeptical, kind of like what we were saying before, because of how many times we know we've been lied to about wondering whether we're being tricked. And that's just the world we're in these days. Question everything at every moment while considering all possibilities. That may sound exhausting. You can choose to put your head in the sand, but that's the world we live in, right? That people are trying to trick you. And so we'd have to constantly, like the Mexico example. I think that's one of the images on the part one. Mexico, we remember that, right? Not that long ago, came out with this like ET looking mummy. Remember that? And it was, I think you and I even talked about that. And it very rapidly, it just broke down and it was a fake. They lied. It was an entire scam. And so what's interesting though, is it caught a lot of momentum and so there's yet another scam like that. And I don't know what that's about. Is it whether it's about trying to convince us of something that isn't there, or maybe normalize us with fakes about something that is going to be there. It's impossible. But I think the truest reality of it is using these things to their benefit right now, which is to deviate from. And in Matt's mindset, it's kind of an idea of like bastardizing like your religious beliefs in a way that like almost, I guess, like maybe for like a Malthusian kind of mindset, like like destroying things for like maybe like like the idea being that like through evil action essentially that you can like gain benefit or be positive. It's a very deep, it's a different conversation to have. My point is that ultimately about whether or not that might be the mindset about trying to create this to deviate us from what we believe in something pure, like the idea of God or Christianity or whatever, but whatever you think about it, I think it's interesting to realize that they are being used to play us. And I think that what that might be caused to do is the idea of the global government aspect they talked about in the beginning, right? And using these, and this is where we should consider the reality of the technology, right? I mean, ask yourself right now, if they came out tomorrow with the kind of stuff I don't know if you've seen the current reality of that tech, it's mind blowing to come out with something that was like, these are aliens. They're right there and they're speaking to us and they're telling, and the government's engaging with them. And, I think people would fall for that. Or even worse, and this worries me with the Israel overlap, if some kind of a second coming. I mean, how many people would fall for that? Because, I mean, a lot of us would want to believe that, this, like if it was really just kind of like some huge, like breathtaking, like glowing cloud dynamic and it was like speaking to everybody, like people would fall for that. And I understand why in some ways, but it's like, that's a scary thing to think about how that can be used. And so like, that's kind of where I feel it all's at. I don't think anybody can truly verify this stuff right now. And I do think that there's worth considering, but I'm worried how we're getting played using it,
Yeah, it's interesting because if we did ask these bigger questions and kind of leave the material world and kind of detach from all the things that separate us and our differences, we talked about religion, cultural differences, geopolitical differences in regards to our worldviews and what countries we're from and what we consider morally acceptable and not acceptable and whatnot. If we zoom out of all that and we start asking those greater questions of like, okay, did we all come from something together? And as time went by, we all got divided into little tribes and whatnot. Maybe it would unite people if we start looking at things in that from that vision. I mean,
I do get that. I mean, the idea that there is a positive note there, but I think it would be abused if it was done by the government. I mean, I don't think they care that we're unified. I think it's about driving us to be easier controlled. But either way, you're right, though. I mean, if we can see beyond these divisions, that is a positive. But I think really what it comes down to is trying to force us into a position where we're easier to control in the mindset that we're still, like, I argue there would still be a forced division. Like with that idea, there would still be a split that keeps us easily divided, but then it still drives us into accepting like a one world control structure. You see what I mean? But I would agree with you that if we can get past the idea that we're different because of imaginary lines or because of our skin color, yeah, that would definitely be a positive thing. But I doubt that would actually happen because I don't think they would let go of that. They would stoke that still.
Yeah, everything will be weaponized and used for some other greater purpose. The war on religion is interesting though, because growing up, a real influential documentary was the Zeitgeist film series.
Yeah.
Kind of showing throughout history in Peter Joseph's opinion and perspective of how religion can be used to manipulate control. I can see how the opposite can also be true. Some people believe, and I've had conversations with people in the past, Michael Millerman and others who, kind of see the Alexander Dugin's perspective of the hatred towards Russia and how the materialistic West wants to control people, and the best way of doing it is kind of making everybody kind of materialistic and making their god or savior or creator or whatever the government or and then it's easier to control people instead of being like, hey, you know what, like there is this greater power that, so I can see how that argument can kind of make sense in regards to maybe the dislike of Russia isn't just geopolitical reasons, but maybe it's ideology, maybe it's because of their pushback against the non-religious West. That seems to be kind of it does seem like they're trying to diminish certain values like the importance of a family, importance of these type of things that are greater than the material world, right? And it's just like we always have to believe in something. Scientism became some people's new religion, even if they didn't realize it. You see debates with Richard Dawkins, or you see debates with Christopher Hitchens, and when he was alive, and it's like you're pointing and laughing at these people because how silly are they to think that they know how this all works, and how dare they think they understand the universe, but yet you're doing the exact same thing. You've just left a team and joined another team that
Right.
has a extreme worldview. But have you looked into and this kind of intertwines with like occultism, and then the Nazis were really intrigued with it. The elite seem to be really intrigued with like symbolism and black magic and mysticism and all these things. Like, do you think there is something about the universe that is being suppressed, like the Vatican and some of these secret societies, or are they also maybe in search of something? That's the other thing I think about. Like, hey, because Hitler was going all over the world looking for the Ark of the Covenant. He was looking for UFOs. He was going to sacred sites looking for information. What's your thoughts on that? Because this does kind of, it seems like another topic, another subject, but it really isn't, because it's always about the elite suppressing information to control. And it seems like some of these ancient civilizations and these conversations seem like more of the same, like the elite trying to suppress information and control the information we have access to so they can control and mold our worldviews.
Yeah, dude, we should have started with that topic. So this is very interesting to talk about. Well, unfortunately, I have an interview in about 10 minutes, heads up. So maybe like 5, I'm gonna have to drop off. But let's just reschedule for like next week and let's have this conversation. But so what I would say though is it's a fascinating thing. Even funny how you mentioned like the Nazi covenant, like it brings to mind like Indiana Jones, And what's funny is in that movie, something that John Rappaport, if you're familiar with, he talks about this a lot. I'm telling you, there's so much that we can even prove is being like, I mean, even just from like a corporate interest level, and I do think it's much more than that, being suppressed. Major life-changing things. And the reason I bring up Indiana Jones is because remember how that movie ends, the first one, the guy like rolling that cart down the middle of this major like warehouse full of just like an endless amount of boxes, all, I mean, potentially like Ark of the Covenant level things, and just gets rolled into another top secret box, and it's like a billion of these boxes. Think about how many, like the joke is that they just slap top secret on it, shove it in a corner, and we never hear it back again. Something like that. I mean, that's a world-changing thing. And so it's like I'm very much of the mind that there are like, whether it's like inventions or other, that there's stuff that we're just not allowed to understand or shown. And I think about like Tesla, for example, right? I mean, that's a very obvious example that we can all bite into. Like you can see Nikola Tesla and the reality of the energy, which, by the way, on a quick funny side note, the Elon Musk making comments about that. And I'm like, what a funny thing to say, like around the H-1B discussion where this is an immigrant. And I'm like, guys, you guys basically stole everything from him. He did die with no money because it's just like, it was a very bad example. Anyway, the point was that, that energy, the reality of the other model that we don't use today, they went with the one that could monetize, of course, that's actually very dangerous. His model of energy would have been free for everybody, and it wouldn't have, and it's we all see those little, that's the like the top level of his stuff today, like in the way that most people see it, that little ball you buy at like Stranger Things or whatever that place is called. The reality is it's actually there's a lot of things you can use for health in that regard, but the point is like it doesn't hurt you. You can touch that and it's not dangerous. And I think the point is that stuff like that would literally change the world. Instantaneously change the world. People like the idea, if we're talking about doing things for the poor people in other countries, and it's like, yes, give us your fake agenda that clearly benefits you and then continues to be at the expense of them, as opposed to something like this that would be free for everybody, give them electricity, give them power. But no, because we want to be able to charge you while we're helping you. That's the way this works. And so there's so many things like that. So many examples. Right. Exactly.
Yeah, that famous, for people who are only listening, that famous Tesla quote, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, you need to think of terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And it's very fascinating because there's a documentary on Gaia called Sounds of, oh my God, I can't, but it's all about frequencies. and how you can use that to heal and whatever. And I'm sure,
Yeah.
musician, you've heard of the the conspiracy about how many hertz we play in and everything's in.
Yeah. I was just gonna say that. I play my guitar in 432 for that very reason. And what's funny is, and you probably do the same, becomes a problem when you try to play with other people because they have to like tune their guitar down to 432. I'm like, sorry, I'm healthy. Sorry. But I think it's more of a mental thing. It changes the way you feel vibrationally. And I really do believe that.
Yeah, it's interesting because even the pyramids and stuff, like we always look at it as like, okay, they built them based on the technology that we understand and have today, right? But we don't think about like, okay, what if they had a different understanding of frequency and vibrations? There's those experiments with water coming out of a faucet, and you change
Yeah.
frequencies, and the water gets manipulated in different ways. You hear stories. I lost you for a second. You're back. And Dr. Tom Cowan, who talks about the water crystallizing differently based on the type of music that's playing.
Yeah. Have you seen? There's a famous Japanese study that did that, like the really, really well done study that showed the different words written on the bottles and like under a microscope. I mean, it blows your mind. You almost want you want to be like, that can't be true, but it's been backed up and done again. And the idea that you can see the water molecule under a microscope that's like dark and jagged, and that's like the word hate, and you look at the word love and it's like a beautiful glowing snowflake, and I'm like, I mean, like, if we can't acknowledge how powerful that is and what that shows you about the world and our words, your body's mostly water. I mean, it's like, these things make a difference. That's a powerful idea. I'm gonna have to jump off, but I'll leave it with the point that can you shoot me another thing? Let's have another conversation about this. I like talking with you. The point being that this stuff is everywhere, man. And whether it's about the bigger picture of the way the world works and our frequencies and our energy and our auras, which are all very real things. People still disparage, but there's scientific stuff that can prove your aura at this point. We are being held back from understanding the full breadth of the world. And you could make that about cannabis, like I talked about, or as like a medical health or textile environmental way to grow, or internal and your physical, your energy, and different devices that are being used to suppress that or make you feel certain ways, getting into the neuroscience and neuro weapon direction of the way the world goes. It's like, guys, if we don't fully understand how this works, we'll never be able to fully fight back with the way they're going right now. So I'm looking forward to that, man. That's a fun topic to get into some of the more abstract, because that's all I used when I first started this on like a radio show a long time ago. It's called, I think it was Third Eye Radio. That's all we did. We even had a thing called like Conspiracy Crossfire, where we would like pull random things out of a hat and talk about conspiracy theory, and it's fun. I mean, I enjoy that because these things are mostly backed by truth at this point. I think most people realize.
Well, I should have assumed you like these topics as a cannabis advocate.
Right.
Because these are definitely, sometimes I bring up these conversations like, dude, my friends will be like, I'm so surprised you don't smoke weed. These are the type of questions that come to me when I'm smoking weed. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I can see how that you can come, have these reflections while you're a little high and pondering.
Yeah. It opens your mind, man. It really does.
It does, yeah. We're a creature of habit. We stay in the same rhythm patterns, and then our thinking, not just physical patterns, but I think our thinking becomes a pattern, and then it's hard to snap out of it. And I think sometimes little weed or alcohol or something to throw a curveball helps. But I know you're a busy man. You got a lot to do. I'll definitely reconnect with you very soon so we can expand on this conversation. If people are listening, definitely, if you're listening to this episode, definitely keep a close eye on the second one, because we'll dive deeper into these topics. But thank you, Ryan, for all the hard work you do. I really, really appreciate it. We'll keep in touch, and I'll send you links to the show once it's up and live.
Sounds good, brother. Thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Ryan. Take care.